What is the single most important skill that will lead to more success in all areas of your life and all your goals? People talk a lot about motivation, but motivation isn't really something you can train. A lot of people will say willpower. And while you can improve your willpower over time, it's still a limited resource that dwindles under pressure. But something that you can always rely on that will always help no matter the situation is your adaptability. How you're able to grow and adapt to new challenges will directly translate to the level of success you're able to have in life and how much you're able to accomplish your goals. But is adaptability a skill? And if it is, how do you get better at it? Well, I'm glad you asked. Welcome to Change Made Easy. Changing your habits, routines, and behaviors is hard. We make it easy. I'm Paul Levitin, a behavior and lifestyle coach for over 12 years, helping people just like you create positive, lasting change in their health, wealth, and relationships. Charles Darwin said, "It is not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change." You may have noticed that some people seem to get dealt a winning hand in life. It seems like they just have all the luck. And other people, maybe you, seem to have fallen out of the bad luck tree and hit every branch on the way down. And you might also see that even though some people do have bad luck, some manage to persevere, while others completely fall flat. So what's the difference? Well, Rich Alderton, my guest today, has been leading change for over 25 years in some of the world's most innovative and dynamic organizations. And he now runs a business called High Performance Change, which helps people prepare for whatever challenges the future holds by being more prepared to handle the inevitable changes and fluctuations of life. In this conversation, you'll hear Rich and I speak about a concept he teaches called adaptability intelligence, and how you can raise your level of adaptability to be better suited to change and win at life. You'll also hear how you can see positive results from even negative changes in your life. And listen for Rich as he outlines the 3 core parameters of adaptability and how you can use them to overcome fear and anxiety and handle any change that comes your way. And with that being said, please enjoy this conversation with my guest, Rich Alderton. What is adaptability intelligence?
Great question to start off with. Let's take those two separately. Intelligence basically is defined as the ability to acquire and apply knowledge. And that's what really excites me about the concept of adaptability intelligence, because people don't think that they can become more adaptable. No one seems to have ever really thought about it as something that you can learn. It's just something you're born with, or it's baked into your DNA. And that's simply not true. So rather than treat it as a business process or a trait, we treat it as a form of intelligence. And adaptability, well, if you look that up in the dictionary, it says something like the ability to adjust to new conditions, which is all very proper and right and a little bit dry and almost entirely useless at describing for us what it actually means to be adaptable and to become more adaptable. So high performance change, we've redefined it according to 3 parameters. It's about having the curiosity to see the need or opportunity for change, i.e. it's reactive or proactive. It's about having the courage to actually go ahead and make that change. And it's about having the velocity to turn on a sixpence or whatever the historical currency is wherever you live, and head off at a tangent, probably not entirely prepared, probably not with all the information you'd like, but to turn, and the reason we talk about velocity, not speed, is because it has a vector. You obviously need to turn in the right direction, because all the change that, the opportunities to be grabbed, the threats to be managed, they all have a window, a time window that you have in which to make the most of whatever happens next. So it's about those 3 things: curiosity, courage, velocity, and adaptability is something that can be learned, which is why we talk about adaptability intelligence.
It's a great breakdown. I appreciate you going into those different pieces. I would love for you to expand a little bit more on curiosity specifically and why you think that's important and why it comes first.
One of the most enlightening and eye-opening questions that I ask prospects and clients at the beginning of an assignment or a cup of coffee meeting is your external environment moving faster than your internal environment? And of course, the reason that's a powerful question is because if the answer is yes, and it is almost invariably yes in the senior leaders I talk to, then the only conclusion from that can be that you're going to start falling behind until you fall over. So it's lucky that adaptability is something that can be learned. Now, coming back to your question, you can only answer that question of is your external environment moving faster than your internal if you have curiosity. You need to be curious about those opportunities to be seized, threats to be managed. You need to understand what's going on out there in your external environment and what's going on inside. Now, I talk predominantly from a work perspective, but from a personal perspective, what's going on in your external environment is everything in your social life, all of your social connections, your friends, your family. That's your external. And what's going on inside you. Adaptability really requires a high level of self-awareness because the practical tools that I've put together to help people span this spectrum or travel this spectrum from the fear of change to the freedom to change, which is how I define what adaptability intelligence covers. You really need to understand you. You need to have a certain level of emotional intelligence to understand and manage your feelings, but also to understand what is going on out there. And all of that comes back to curiosity. If you have got your head stuck in the sand, you will be incapable of change. And if you do change, the chances are you'll make the wrong one because you're responding to a stimulus that you have no idea whether it's the right thing or not.
I love that spectrum from the fear of change to the freedom to change. And as you said, when you have your head in the sand, great analogy, and you're just avoiding everything or willfully ignorant to what's going on around you, it becomes impossible to create the change. And then we're stuck wondering why things are happening to us rather than us being in control of our lives. And you mentioned the internal versus the external environment. And one of the things that I like to talk about a lot is the knowledge of self, is exactly what you're talking about. And that to me is a meta skill. It's a superpower. The more you know yourself, the better decisions that you can make. But you also talk about the external environment, the social, whether it's business, whether it's personal, like there's so much outside of us that goes on as well. So which one do you start with? And is there one side that's more important than the other?
No, I think the answer to the question lies in the relativity of the two. So you cannot understand one. You cannot understand the importance of needing to change unless you understand both sides, because it could be that your external environment is moving very, very slowly. Maybe you run an artisanal bakery attached to the local windmill, and people are paying for the fact that nothing has changed in 125 years, in which case people listen to me and they go, this guy's completely off the planet because I don't need to do any of these things that he's talking about. That person who's baking in the windmill might be much more dynamic than his external environment needs him to be. But for the other 99.9% of us, I think the curiosity, I think lots of people don't understand, particularly in big businesses. I find the bigger the business, the more that you become insulated from what is really going on out there in the real world. But equally, I come across a lot of people who don't have the level of self-awareness that they need, not just to be adaptable, but just to be good, happy, healthy humans.
I definitely agree. And that's why I like having conversations like this and with people like you, because every bit of advice that you give to a CEO or an owner or an entrepreneur is good advice for someone trying to be healthier, trying to be happier, just trying to be a little bit more well adapted to life. Because what is the market and business but an analogy for life itself? All of this stuff interweaves itself together. And, we've talked a little bit about change, right? How do you know? Being curious can lead you to know when you need to change. That question that you posed is a great one, right? Is your internal environment being outpaced by your external environment? And if so, you're going to fall over eventually. I really love that. So, my question is, how do we start to think about change? Because isn't it a paradox in itself that that's a change in itself? Like if I'm going to change the way I think about change and I'm averse to change, then how do I ever get there?
Brilliant. You're absolutely spot on, Paul. It's what I call, it's part of what I call the adaptability paradox, which is that the skills that we need in order to be able to change quickly are not skills that we can develop quickly. It is difficult. I suppose in a way that's good for me because I make my living out of it. And if everybody could do it at the drop of a hat. But no, seriously, it is a difficult thing to do. But when we think about change, the model that I've created is basically a game of two halves, really. It's a combination of traditional psychology and more modern positive psychology, which goes something like this. When you look at why do people resist change? Well, how does that show up? It shows up as the most primal negative emotions that we are capable of generating, such as fear and anxiety primarily. Look, we've evolved over 50,000 years to see change as a threat to our security, and we are programmed to exhibit fear and anxiety. But if we can learn to control our fear and manage our anxiety, and we can absolutely do that, and there's lots and lots and lots of research that says we can. The American Psychological Association says that anxiety is entirely treatable. It's actually finding out that people are anxious that's most of the problem, because we're world class at keeping it hidden. That's a whole different story. But if we can learn to control our fear and manage our anxiety, and by the way, I should say to everybody listening here, I am not a trained psychologist. This is all I'm talking about is common garden, subclinical, everyday anxiety that we all feel when we are presented with change, whether that's, the loss of a friendship, the loss of a loved one, having to implement a new IT system at work or an org restructure, that kind of thing. I'm not talking about any of the more serious forms of anxiety like GAD and depression and et cetera, right? So if we can get out of our own way, which is what the tools that I've got help people to do that. If you can deal with your fear and manage your anxiety, you can get out of your own way. And then the magic really starts to happen, because then you can start to see change for what it really is. This is where I get very excited. It is the best chance that any of us is ever going to get to make a difference in life and find out and be tested to the limits of our capabilities. The status quo is never going to give you those opportunities. So it's a long-winded way of answering your question about how do you get going on this journey? Well, you start at the bottom. And although luckily most of us don't live in fear for most of our lives, it is in a state of fear, you are dead to change. That is why it props up the very bottom of the model, sits at the bottom end, the low end of the adaptability intelligence spectrum. And then once you have dealt with your fears, then you're much less likely to be anxious about whatever it is that you think might be over the horizon or round the corner that's going to bite you in the bum and cause you fear at some point in the future. So being able to deal with fear actually lessens your anxiety. Then you carry on that journey to think, right, now I'm not seeing change in my mind as this big Tyrannosaurus Rex that's going to rip me apart. I'm actually seeing it now as an opportunity to do something positive. We've only had positive psychology in the last 30 years or so. Amazing, because we've had psychology for 150. But when we can start seeing change, even negative change, as the chance to make a positive difference of some kind, then we are starting to develop a much more adaptable mindset.
Could you expand on that last bit of seeing negative change as a positive occurrence?
Right. Okay. The best way to explain that is to talk first about resilience, because resilience and adaptability in my book are not the same things. Resilience is part of adaptability. Now, if you look up, let's go back to definitions. If you look up the dictionary definition of resilience, it says the ability to bounce back, or for a deformed shape to retake its original shape. So resilience is what a palm tree does in a hurricane, right? It bends to that change in the weather and then it copes with it. It's almost negative. It's almost entirely a negative concept, resilience. It's about coping with and resisting and standing up to negative change. And when that change is over, then all you want to do is go back to being the way that you were before, which isn't in. So I hope you can see that adaptability is about going further than that. So if resilience is about having the ability to bounce back, adaptability is about having the ability to bounce higher. It is about taking something negative that has happened to you, or even positive, and either going from good to great or going from negative to positive. And whatever it is that you're given, whatever lemons you're served in life, it's all about making the most of whatever happens next to you and having that confidence to say, look, I know that bad stuff is going to happen to me in my life. If you are close to anyone, you are going to lose relationships. If you are in good health, it will deteriorate. There are absolutes in our life that are going to be negative, and it's how we mentally deal with those in a positive way that makes us adaptable, much more so than resilience can go. Resilience can only take you back to the way you were. Adaptability can develop you as a person so that you can learn to, this is my purpose in life, in the work that I do, to help as many people as I can to enjoy rather than endure the life of change that surely lies ahead for us all, whatever happens in that life, which is almost certainly going to involve something negative along the way, unfortunately.
100%. It's a fact of life in infinite ways that bad things happen, and to just come to grips with that is a big part of life in general. But I really love the analogy of the palm tree and the distinction between resilience and adaptability. I like that analogy of the palm tree and the hurricane because, one, it's very vivid, but what I'm hearing is that resilience is still important, because in the hurricane, what you're not doing is building new houses, right? If adaptability is building a new structure during the hurricane, that's not your focus. The focus is to survive. And there are times when life has its boot on your neck, and your only option or your only real need at that time is to just get through it. When you're in the hurricane and you're that tree, you just need to not get your roots ripped out of the ground and hurtled across the field.
Absolutely spot on. So I suppose I'm making this up as I go along now, but the analogy would continue that once the hurricane is over, the tree would grow if it's an adaptable. Maybe it would use the wind to take the seeds of the tree, to pastures new. I don't know. I'm getting a bit colourful now, but you're absolutely right. It is about that. If I were to rock up, so I contextualize adaptability as being part of culture. I encourage organizations to develop cultures of adaptability. Now, if I rocked up, going to your scenario, your very good scenario, if I rocked up when that company was 3 days away from not being able to pay the wage bill because the cash flow was living on fumes. And I said, why don't we have a session to talk about improving the culture in your organization so that people feel happy? The CEO, to use your words, has got the external environment, has got its foot on his neck. And the last thing he wants to think about is being adaptable. All he wants to be is resilient. So you're absolutely right. There's a time and place. But what I want to do is furnish people with the skills and the confidence that they can face anything and ultimately take that to the next level, not just back to square one.
Yeah, I think it's as you said from the very beginning, to start to look at these things as skills that we can build, both resiliency and adaptability. And again, for those listening, I always think this is important just to note, because this is everything in life, right? We're using palm tree analogies and business analogies, but this is just life. There's a time in life when you have the capacity to go to the gym and cook and meditate and do the things. And like, that's your adaptability phase. But there comes a time in life when you got fired, or you're going through a breakup, or you have to take care of your sister's kids because she's sick, or a million other things that happen. And that's when resiliency comes into play. And it's okay, because I think that we judge ourselves around, what I call the shoulds. I should be able to keep up with this. I should be always growing. I should be adapting all the time. But we have to realize that there's natural ebbs and flows that life goes through. And sometimes, again, just standing tall and not getting blown over is as much of a win as we can ask for. And to take that a step further, if normally you would have gotten blown over and you stand tall, that actually is progress. Even if you didn't build something new, just not getting bowled over by life is forward progress. And this is something that when I've worked with lots of people in lots of different areas, and I consider myself a student of success. That's what this whole podcast is about. And I've studied successful people. And this is something that the most successful people in all areas inherently know, and they inherently feel. So I'm curious if there's any other or specific commonalities that you've seen as you work with successful companies, successful CEOs, successful entrepreneurs, that tie all of the most successful people together in their practices.
I have certainly worked with companies who have been at those different phases. To continue our analogy, what you're talking about is the reason why trees have rings in them, because they go through growth phases, and then, according to the seasons, and then they don't. So again, I think what you're saying is absolutely right. And what I've seen is when I've had the full spectrum of clients, that some of them are absolutely ready to go to the gym. They've got time to do cooking. They're good to go. They're completely open to the idea of starting this very difficult journey. It's an exponentially high cliff here that it gets easier as you go on, but taking those first few steps, as you said a couple of questions ago, is very difficult for unadaptable people, not good with change, to be able to change not just behavior, primal behavior. It is difficult. And some are ready for that journey. Some know that they need to be ready for that journey, but life is just getting in the way, and that external environment, I could turn up and say, oh, you should have called me a year ago. It's true, but it's not helpful before you got so far into this mess that you're calling me now in as the fire brigade, when you should have called me in as, the consultant. So yeah, I think there is absolutely a right time and a right place for this kind of thinking. And I've said before in other blogs and things, this is not stuff that's going to happen. It's the paradox. It's not stuff that's going to happen overnight, and it does take time and it does take effort. And you are going to get it wrong, because you are talking about changing 50,000 years of training.
Yeah. And again, this is, I come back to this often with myself, with guests, everything on this show. It's like 100%. It's going to be hard. It's going to take a long time. It's going to suck. And what other choice do you have? Right? That, that to me is like the long and short of it. It's like there's the other option is no better. And I think that's the important thing for people to grapple with here. It's like, yes, it is hard to change. Yes, it is uncomfortable to change. Yes, change takes longer than we wanted it, and it happens slower than we wanted, and the result is less than we wanted, and it costs more than we wanted, and a million reasons not to do it. But the opposite is anxiety and fear and depression and all of the negative things that we go to. No one is asking, if your life is great, then you don't have to change. But most people aren't floating around in this existential happy place where they're just everything is great. Most people are unhappy with some aspect of their life, whether it's their health, their mental well-being, their financial status, their relationship, or something like that, and yet stuck in this place where they're afraid to change because of, as you said, the biological reasons that keep us stuck. And that's completely understandable. So, if we go back to, you said the bottom thing, fear is kind of like that bottom layer. And then curiosity was the bottom layer of your start to like adaptability. So do you see fear and curiosity as being kind of the opposite of each other? Are those like the two sides of the same coin?
Okay, well, I was going to offer you a couple of antidotes. I wasn't going to give you this one, but I will as you've asked the question. So one of the antidotes. So what happens when we're in a state of fear is, as everybody knows, because we're all biochemists, everybody understands the fight or flight response, right? So I am actually a biochemist by training. So we understand that. So we understand that we go into auto mode. And what actually happens in our brain is that the amygdala, with the fear center of the brain, shuts down all of the higher functioning parts of the brain, which is quite a party trick given the size of the supercomputer that it's shutting off. And we actually act without thinking. That's what we're designed to do, because again, back on the planes, that microsecond that it takes to fire up the important, very high functioning parts of the brain that can make all these brilliant decisions. That's the difference between life and lunch, or being lunch, right? So what you've got to do is you've got to learn to switch that back on, and you've got to run towards the source of your fear mentally. Don't do that in a dark alley. Mentally towards the source of your fear, not away from it, because that's what adrenaline wants you to do. Get the hell out of Dodge, right? You actually, so the antidote that I prescribe is go towards it. Find out everything that you can about that, the source of the fear. So let's say at work, what's one of the worst things that can happen is you lose your job. Right? So you're sitting there in front of your boss. All you want to do is punch him on the nose or run out of there kicking and screaming, right? What you do instead is you start asking questions like, are there any other jobs? Am I qualified to do them? Is there a skills gap between me and any available jobs? Would you be prepared to fund that? How long would it take? Would there be any salary differences? You can start going into whatever it is. Now, worst case scenario, all the answers to those questions are negative. No, there's no chance for you to stay here. What you've done in that time is you have given yourself time to at least give yourself some feeling back of control. Why? Because you started asking questions. That's all, Paul, about coming back to curiosity. So it's no mistake. I made that connection after I'd put all this together, but the symmetry is beautiful. That to be at your most adaptable, you need to be able to deal with the lowest levels of what makes you unadaptable. So a very perceptive question.
I appreciate you offering that a little bit and digging a little bit deeper there. I think that's extremely helpful for people. And again, I always come back to, this is just human stuff. And all of these struggles that we have, we share as humans. And that means all of the answers are also things that we share as humans. As technically easy as it may be, it's still challenging in practice. And that's why I like to have conversations like this, because everything is theoretically easy, but putting it into practice, it doesn't make it any easier. And that goes back to, as you said, it's a skill. I always look at everything as, using the gym as an analogy. It's a muscle that you build. And the first time it's very hard. And the second time it's still very hard. And the third time it's very hard. But the 10th, 11th, 12th, 100th time, it's a little bit easier. And I like to remind people that this is the infinite game. There's no end cap on our tries or on whatever life is until there is. And when it's over, it's over. And then you have other things to worry about. So I don't really get caught up in that. Until then, we get to keep trying. And that's why building that adaptability as a skill is so important. So you've given us a few different, the curiosity, how to stray away from fear. But when you're talking to someone on a personal level, right? Not a business, but you're like you said, you're meeting someone for coffee or something like that. And someone is just stuck. And to use your verbiage, which is the same verbiage I love, which I love this term, you want to help people get out of their own way. If you had 5 minutes to just, I'm never going to see this person again. We're standing in line at the coffee. What's the advice you give to someone to help them move forward after this conversation?
How much change have you been through in the last 5 years? First question. Then, how was that for you? Did you enjoy it? Which of the bits did you enjoy? Were there bits that you didn't enjoy? Would you have wished that you could have dealt with that in a different way if you'd been more responsive? If I said to you, how would you rate yourself on the scale of 1 to 10 on curiosity, courage, and having the ability to move quickly? Are you a procrastinator? Do you head off too quickly, or do you do that on a rational thought base? And how much change do you think you're going to go through in the next 5 years? Is it going to get easier? Is it going to get harder? And if you multiply what you've been through by whatever you think that change is going to be in the next 5 years, then would you wish to become more adaptable if I could wave a magic wand and tell you that it's possible? Now, assuming the answer to that question is yes, then I can say, okay, well, I can't give you a magic wand, but what I can give you is I can give you a proven, practical roadmap that will identify where you are in terms of your adaptability intelligence right here, right now, today. You can put yourself on that map. You don't need me to do that. And then you can figure out where it is that you think you need to get to. Do you need to be the ultimate adaptable person, or do you just want to be, just a bit better than I am today? And then I can promise to give you some tools that will help you on your way, and the degree to which you use those tools will mirror the degree to which you will increase your adaptability. And here's the thing about adaptability. Whatever skills you've got, everybody, I hope, listening to this will be proud of the skills that they've got and that they've learned and developed over their lifetime. Social skills, technical skills, cultural skills, whatever it is. Here's the thing, though. If you are not adaptable, then you will... People who are unadaptable but highly skilled will, when faced with change, tend to roll up like a hedgehog. I don't know, do you have hedgehogs in America? Spiky things on the outside. As a defense mechanism, you'll roll up and you'll prevent everybody around you from accessing all those key skills and experience that you've got just at the very moment that they need you the most and that you need you the most. So adaptability is the one skill to rule them all. It unlocks your ability to use all of your other skills. So it's kind of a meta skill when the stuff hits the fan, which is going to be the most pivotal times in your life. So why wouldn't you, given what you've been through in the last 5 years, given what you think you're going to go through, why would you not at least give this a go to try and start this tough journey that gets easier to become more adaptable. How was
That's
that?
great. The two things, big points that I really like that you just said are, one, about the hedgehog. We do have hedgehogs in America. I've never seen one, but
Excuse my ignorance.
I've never seen one, but I know that they exist. And it's that was a great analogy of that. When if you're not adaptable, you will ball up. And I love that you said there are skills that you have. There is something that you can do. There is light that you can give out into this world that other people need you. If you're a mom, your kids need you. If you're a dad, your kids need you. If you're a son, your parents need you. Someone out there needs you, and they need you to be the best, brightest, most exuberant version of yourself. And fear is the exact opposite of that. Living in this place of not being able to, being afraid, being averse to change is the opposite of all of that. And that's the worst thing you can do for yourself, but it's also the worst thing that you can do for everyone else. And often I think it's important to highlight this because we as humans tend to do more for others than we will for ourselves. That's why accountability
Absolutely.
works, because we'll do for our, you'll do for your kids, you'll do for your parents, but you won't do for you. So if you won't do it for yourself, do it for them. But I really like what you mentioned about that exercise. Okay, look 5 years back. And how much change have you gone through? How much trials and tribulations, ups and downs, yada, yada. How much better do you wish you were? Now look ahead 5 years. And do you think that it's going to be easier than that? Because that's the thing that this paradox, we think that like the tough times are behind us, or that we're different now. We think that who we are now is who we're always going to be. Where if I look back, I'm 34, turning 35 this year. If I look back to where I was 25, I'm like, oh, that's a whole different person. But I think that me, 35-year-old Paul, is Paul forever. But it stands to reason then that 45-year-old me is going to look back at 35-year-old me and say like, well, who the hell was that guy? But we don't think about it that way. We think about the past as the past and the future as being the same as now, but it's not, clearly. So when you work with people, we have this paradox of how we view time, right? It's like I want things now because the future is so far away, and like now matters, and the future really doesn't. So what are some of the short-term things that you do to get people going for the long-term future?
Okay, there are the good thing about the antidotes to the reasons that we resist change, and the stimulants that boost the reasons we love it, which is what this roadmap that I've designed, is filled with along the way, is that you can start using those things immediately. Now, if we go back to that fear example, it's very difficult to train people how to respond in fear. The military and the emergency services are very good at it. They're allowed to scare their people and put them into falsely burning buildings. It says on their contract they're allowed to do that. For the rest of us, it's not so easy to do that. But if we take a look at anxiety, which is ever present, we all feel anxiety from time to time. If you understand what anxiety is, and maybe I'll come back to the definition and the difference between that and fear. I don't want to lose my train of thought though. If you understand that anxiety is about your negative future perception, it's your almost entirely, usually, a Penn State University study showed that 90% of what we worry about never actually happens. But if you understand that anxiety is caused by your thoughts about this exponential path that you create for yourself, where you take a negative scenario, possible scenario, and then you multiply that by another negative possible scenario, and then you eventually multiply all of that by your phone number, and no wonder you end up at rock bottom, at the bottom of this exponential cliff. And one of the antidotes there is based on what psychologists call rational emotional behavior therapy. And again, this is where it comes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, Paul, about self-awareness. You have got to stand as judge and jury on your own thoughts. Because in a state of anxiety, we don't let people inside our heads very often, which is why talking therapies are so good. But one simple thing that you can start to learn to do And I encourage this. So when I'm coaching people, I will be, the guy that sits on their shoulder, the little voice asking them their question, and then they can quickly learn that for themselves. Is this realistic? Is this actually going to happen? Is there any kind of probability that this is going to happen? And if it does, is it going to be as catastrophic as I think in my own mind that it's going to be? And when you can start doing that, which is an exercise you can start immediately, again, it takes time, but it all comes with the confidence, then you can start to really have a go at yourself. And that's part of the process that helps you get out of the way, because the research says 9 times out of 10, when you challenge yourself, if you do that 100% rationally, 90% of the time, you'll come to the conclusion that you are making up stuff that doesn't need worrying about. Our brain only weighs 3% of our body weight, but it consumes 20% of our energy. So when we say that anxiety is exhausting, we are not talking metaphorically. This is, and you talk about muscles and gyms, this is absolutely draining. Now, if Penn State are right, and 90% of our thoughts that make us anxious are a waste of time. Imagine, Paul, just imagine if we could flip that and we could stop feeling anxious. I know that's a theoretical utopia, but if we could completely convert all of that energy into positive energy, into thinking about how we can use this change for the better, to make a difference, to find out what I'm really capable of achieving in life, then that is some delta between where our thoughts take us and where an adaptable mindset could lead us to. That's what gets me leaping out of bed gazelle-like in the morning to try and help people understand this stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And it's exponential, as you just said. If 90% of the things don't come true and our brain takes up 20% of our literal energy, that means that 90% of that 20% is wasted. And that's pure, when you talk about literal being exhaustion, people who do suffer with anxiety or depression or these type of things know that it is physically exhausting. It becomes hard to get out of bed in the morning. It becomes hard to do your daily chores or your tasks. And again, then we can start to beat ourselves up and say like, well, I'm just being lazy. It's like, no, your brain is literally burning the glucose or whatever it is that you need for energy to do the other things on tasks or on theoretical outcomes somewhere in the future that 90% of the time won't come true. And I can already hear the voice in my head goes, yeah, but what about that 10% of the time? And that's why I love the tool that you just said. Is like, but okay, you can investigate that. This goes back to being curious. What would actually happen? Because now, not only does it only happen 10% of the time, but 10% of the time it happens, but the worst outcome probably isn't the thing. I do this with my clients. I'm like, what's the worst that can happen? What's the thing that you're thinking of? Like, I get fired. I'm poor. I get kicked out of my house. My wife divorces me, and I lose everything. And like, I'm sleeping on the street by next week. And it's like, okay, like that's the worst case scenario. What's the best case scenario? Say your boss is calling you into his office on a Friday. Well, I get a promotion. I get a raise. He's making me COO. And even though I only work in the mailroom, that like, I'm going to be running the company next week. It's like, okay, well, let's realize that both of those are equally probable and probably not going to happen. And like, let's find that middle ground of like, what's probably going to be the thing that happens. And when you do that, it comes back to, as you just said, thinking rationally, when so much of this anxiety, fear, everything is run by emotion. And while that's a challenge in and of itself, thinking rationally when emotion is taking over, the simplest way I've come to find this is to just take time. This is Viktor Frankl, between impulse and response, there's a pause, and that pause is all of humanity. And if you can just do that, if you can give yourself more time between what happens and your reaction to it, there's a better chance of your logical, rational brain, your adaptable brain, your resilient brain coming in and thinking like, okay, maybe the world isn't burning. But we so often just go from impulse to act, impulse to act, impulse to act. And after the fact, again, looking back over the course of 5 years, I can say, well, this really took me down the wrong path. But now we can start to use that and say, okay, if that's what happened 5 years ago, I can change that and move forward differently 5 years from now.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, to back up what you're saying, fight or flight, clues in the title, it makes you do stuff without thinking. And if you don't come back from that, that path that you should be on compared with the one that your adrenaline sets you on, if you don't come back from that, then very quickly you can be a long way away from where you need. The interesting thing about anxiety is that it does the opposite. So if fear makes you act without thinking, anxiety tends to make you think without acting. We spin the wheels inside our heads, and we go nowhere fast. It's a complete waste of energy, except that we start digging ourselves into this well so far down that we don't have the energy to bring ourselves back up. And again, that's why opening up in anxiety is so important, because then we can tap into the energy of others around us who care about us, who can actually help us get up out of that hole. So if you think about anxiety as being this all-encompassing thing that can totally freak us out, then the worst thing is that we then do nothing with all of these huge thoughts that we're doing. Now, is it bad to worry about the future? No, absolutely not. You mentioned the 10%. The comparison I make is between your average human being like me, because I get anxious, I worry about stuff, and NASA. So NASA worries about stuff. NASA worries about stuff for a living, right? They do all of this scenario planning about what could possibly go wrong, which is great, taps right into our negativity bias, that what could possibly go wrong bias that we have. The difference between me and NASA, okay, there might be a couple of differences between me and NASA, but one of them is that once they've identified what could go wrong in the future, they do something to mitigate it. And what we do as human beings, as normal human beings, is we just carry on. We use that conclusion that we've drawn as a exclamation mark and as a boost point from which to trigger the next negative scenario that will almost certainly never happen. So the key thing with anxiety is to do something about it. If you've done the rational, thoughtful challenge and you still think it's going to happen, then do something about it. Take action. And that in itself will make you feel better, even if it's the wrong thing. Guess what? You'll find out it was the wrong thing and you can reverse up.
Yeah, it's cliche to say, but it is the truth. Action is usually the antidote for everything. And just simply acting will, as you said, either cure it or it'll tell you, well, that didn't work and I can try something else. I really love the distinction of fear and anxiety. And fear, as you said, fear is acting without thinking, and anxiety is thinking without acting. 100% going to steal that from you. So I appreciate that. And last question that I have for you, Rich, before I let you go. If you had one action step that you can leave listeners with right now, today, as soon as this episode ends, as soon as they take their headphones out to start living a happier, healthier life, what would it be?
No, just know that adaptability is not something you're born with. You weren't lucky or unlucky. It's absolutely a skill that can be learned, like maths or music or martial arts. We've known since 1983 that there are very different types of intelligence, and we all have a level of adaptability intelligence, and we can all improve it, even me. I like to think I'm very adaptable, but I've been put in situations that have tested me and made me realize that I'm certainly not, mastering anything is a never-ending journey. And I've certainly proven that to myself. So please believe and understand that everyone can become more adaptable if you so desire.
Now you understand the power of adaptability and the importance of increasing your adaptability intelligence. Just like your intelligence around computers or lifting weights or anything else that you want to excel at in life, adaptability can be improved through conscious effort and time. Just remember Rich's 3 core aspects of adaptability, which are curiosity, courage, and velocity. That one was super interesting to me. Use those to deal with the negative emotions that come along with change, like anxiety and fear, and you'll be able to adapt to whatever comes your way. And that is change made easy.